Hey everyone, so today I wanted to talk about something that I think affects a lot of people with unhealthy relationships with food, and that's this idea that we're not skinny enough to be deserving of recovery or maybe a diagnosis or concern from our loved ones. There's this misconception that in order to be sick, you need to also be skinny and you need to look like the stereotypical image of someone suffering from an eating disorder. And this is not true. Most people with eating disorders tend to be at a healthy or like above average weight, and severity isn't determined by weight alone. Like, that's just one thing that a treatment team will look at when evaluating whether or not you have disordered eating or an eating disorder. They also look at things like geographic location to a treatment center, comorbid mental illnesses, like whether you have like depression or anxiety or another mental illness that needs treatment at a less intensive or maybe more intensive setting. They look at self-harm and suicide risk. They look at like history of being treated for an eating disorder. They look at duration of illness and severity and frequency of symptom use. And they look at whether you're motivated to recover. And they also look at your medical records, and occasionally you'll get like an extensive like panel of medical tests in order to determine severity. And weight is just one little tiny thing. It's not even the most important thing. It's not the deciding factor as to whether you get a diagnosis or whether you get insurance coverage or whether you like deserve recovery. Like, skinniness is not everything when it comes to eating disorders. It's usually not the case. Like, people like they people look at everything. The people who know what they're doing are going to look at everything, and they're also going to look at how like distressing your symptoms are, like whether they really bother you, and they're going to look at how like impaired your life is and how difficult it is for you to like continue normal like daily functioning and have a healthy and happy life. And if you have a treatment team that tells you that like weight is the most important thing and that you're somehow not sick or skinny enough to get recovery, I would suggest to you to find a new treatment team. Like, that's not your problem. That is their problem. Like, it doesn't I think the idea that we're somehow not skinny or sick enough doesn't always come from us. Like, yes, it can come from our cognitive distortions, right? Like, people with eating disorders and disordered eating tend to have what's called all or nothing thinking, which is when we think if we haven't met this lofty goal for ourselves, we've somehow failed. So we may look at someone and perceive them to be smaller than us and think, oh, this person's so much skinnier, they must be so much sicker, therefore I'm not sick, I'm making it up, and I don't deserve recovery. Like, that's an example of all or nothing thinking. But it also comes from our society, and the fact is, we live in an image obsessed society, and we're told to diet, and dieting is used as this like big distraction to prevent us from discovering and like cultivating what we're actually good at and what we actually want to do in life. Um, they always talk about people with eating disorders as having a lot of potential. And the thing is, this potential doesn't go away as we get sick, but our own ability to recognize what we want to do as opposed to what our eating disorder wants us to do, it becomes more and more impaired. Um, so that's why early recovery is important. But recovery, I think recovery is possible and worth it at any point during your illness. And there's so much more to life than like being sick and being obsessed with dieting and being like obsessed with what we look like. Sorry if you can hear my cat. He like just came into the room, which is not very convenient, but whatever. He's being cute. Yeah. So weight is just one tiny, tiny factor. It's not even the most important factor. Um, a doctor who knows what they're doing is not just going to weigh you and use that, or like look at you and use that to determine whether you're sick or not. And another thing is, disordered eating and eating disorders are pretty much just as dangerous. Like, people with disordered eating are at the same risk as of like depression and anxiety as people with like clinically recognized eating disorders. And people with disordered eating like are also at greater risk to develop a very severe like eating disorder because they get invalidated pretty much at every turn. Like, but the only difference between disordered eating and eating disorders is the like frequency or severity of symptoms. Like, just because someone else may have a more or less severe eating disorder doesn't mean your experiences and your suffering isn't valid. Like, someone else's problems don't negate your own. And it's really hard to have that internal validation, especially for people with disordered eating and eating disorders. But it is something worth like working on because like it's really hard to it's really hard to look at everything that's all the outside influences from the media and from other people and from stereotypes about eating disorders and like not think that like we deserve, like it's hard to believe that we're deserving of treatment. But it is true. It doesn't matter like it doesn't matter what your diagnosis is or what you look like or how severe or frequently you use behaviors. It doesn't matter. Like you it's not a competition. There's no like scale. There's no like there is a spectrum, yes, but only for the sake of like categorizing people, so that a doctor can like look at your diagnosis and know what's going on. Like that's it. It's for the people like examining you. It's not really for you. Like a diagnosis, a specific eating disorder diagnosis doesn't really mean much in the long run because they tend to change and because like it just it's just a label. Like it's not really a thing. It can't show other people how you have suffered. It can't show people like what has happened to you and how different your life is because of your disordered eating or eating disorder and like how much your quality of life has deteriorated and how like distressed you are and how and like your ability to get daily work done. Like no label can tell you that. It's up to you to know whether enough is enough. And it is really, really hard. It's really hard to see the media and like other people and stereotypes about eating disorders and to know that like people conflate illness with like severe like emaciation. And it's hard to just like let it like to just ignore it and to just know that you are worth it. But the truth is, you are. Like, it doesn't matter what your symptoms are, it doesn't matter how long you've had your eating disorder, it doesn't matter how much you weigh. Like, you don't have to be skinny to feel like you're worth treatment. If your life has been impacted negatively in any way by an eating disorder, or by disordered eating, or even by dieting, like, you deserve to get help and you deserve to get back to having a healthy relationship with food. And like it's not your fault. I really do feel like a lot of it has to do with our society and the fact that like dieting is such a big distraction from what we actually want to do in life, and that like eating disorders are kind of brushed off and brushed aside and there's so many stereotypes about them, and that like they're very like physical illnesses. Like they're probably the most like the mental illness with the most physical side effects. But yeah, like sorry, I don't know. I don't remember what I was saying. But the point is it is hard to come to this internal validation, and I will talk about this later, like how can I tell myself that I'm worth it. But just know that you are, and it doesn't matter what you look like or what's going on with you. Like if your relationship with food has like changed the way you live your life in a way that you don't feel as positive, like that's valid. That's worth help. It doesn't matter what anyone else says or what other outside influences are telling you. It doesn't matter what you weigh, what you think you look like. Um, it doesn't matter. It's just it's really just like how much your life has been affected by it. And when you decide that like it's too much and that you want to get better, and I really do believe recovery is worth it at any point, whether you have disordered eating, whether you have a clinical eating disorder, whether you haven't bothered getting tested, or because only one in like 10 people get treatment for eating disorder, and I think it's the same statistic for people who get diagnosed. Like so many people get swept under the rug or don't want to get a diagnosis, and that's fine. That's fair. That's completely normal and valid and common. Eating disorders are a lot more diverse than we think, and it sucks that that the rest of the world hasn't caught up with us. But the truth is, eating disorders are so much more than like the really skinny like white girl who has anorexia. Like that is valid, but that's not the only picture of an eating disorder. That's not the only way it manifests. That's not the only way it affects people. It's really, if you're suffering, you deserve help. That's the bottom line. And I really do hope that you get help if you decide that you need it. And I am sorry for. I am sorry if you believe that, if you have ever believed that you were somehow not skinny enough to deserve recovery, because you deserve recovery right here, right now. Yeah. So that's it. I hope this helped.